Hi there! Today I'm going to teach you how to create this beautiful seascape using acrylic. I had so much fun creating this and I know that you will too. So here I've got a medium-sized brush. It's not too soft but not too hard, fairly firm bristles. You can use whichever brush you like, but this is just the one I prefer. So dab your brush a little bit with some water, and first we're going to block out where we want everything. So if we grab a bit of ultramarine and just paint in where we want the horizon of the sea. I usually go for 2/3 up to the canvas. Then wash your brush out, grab a bit of raw sienna and paint in where you want the sea to end. This is just a very basic outline and it just really helps to get things straight in our minds where we want everything. So for the first layer I paint in the darkest colours that we've got. So in the sky we're going to get a bit of cerulean blue and we're going to paste that in quite neat up at the top. We don't want to use a lot of water here, just so it spreads nicely onto the canvas. And then you can just blend that out a little bit. Okay, so next we're going to take some raw sienna and a bit of ultramarine blue and we're going to mix that in so it's nice and dark. So to get a more muted version of a colour, you add the opposite colour that is opposite the colour wheel. So with blues it's going to be orangey brown colours. So add a little bit of your phthalo green to that, just to give it a nice turquoise colour. If it looks now too green, just add a bit more blue, until you get a nice deep colour of a turquoise, so we can paste that into the horizon again. It's important to remember as well, the further away something is, the more muted the colours are, and the more bright the colours are is when it's a lot closer. So for instance, the sea here, where the horizon is going to be more muted than the forefront here. Now obviously, because this is just the first layer, the white of the canvas is showing through a lot, so we're going to add a lot more layers to really build up the colour. Okay, so we're going to make some more of that colour now, but just with a little bit less of the raw sienna. So get some ultramarine and some phthalo green and mix that together, and then we're just going to carry on bringing it down to the shoreline. And as we bring it down, I want you to put a little bit more green in and a little bit of white. So if we add a tiny bit of white to begin with, and a bit more green. If it's struggling to move across the canvas, just add a tiny little bit of water to the mixture. Now don't worry if it's looking very basic at this point, because the details are going to come later. Now we want to add a lot more white to that mixture, so it's nice and light, and just bring that down to the line that we've put for the shore. Now give your brush a really good wash out. Okay, so lastly we're going to put in the sand. So here we want a bit of raw sienna. We want to add a tiny bit of ultramarine, ever so slight, and lots of white. And we're just going to pop that in here. So now we've got the basic outline and shapes that we really want our painting to be laid out like. Now we have to wait for that to dry, and then we're going to go over it again, putting a little bit more detail in this time. Make sure you keep washing your brush out. Okay, so when that's dry, we now want to go over and do a fairly similar thing, but we want to add a bit more detail in. So once again, take your cerulean blue and apply that neat to the very top of the sky. Then as we work down, we want to slightly add a little bit of white in. So you can get it on your palette here, cerulean blue with a bit of white. And you can see that that's a lot more lifelike as a sky. So we add white, because this area is more in the distance, it's more muted and lighter. So now we just want to blend that up. So take that up as far as it can go, and then take your cerulean and then blend that down. Don't worry too much about the horizon line being very neat, because we're going to build on that a little bit more. So once you've done that, then wash your brush out really well. Okay, so now we're going to make this horizon line again. So we want to take some ultramarine and some phthalo green, and also a slight bit of yellow ochre. Until you get a lovely deep turquoise. Then once again we want to paste that into the horizon. Feel free to use masking tape if you struggle getting a straight line at this point. There's no shame in that. Now what we want to do is take a clean brush. Here I'm using quite a nice wide brush, a very soft one. It's very clean, so you don't want it to be wet at all, just very dry and clean. And you just want to take it and just blend that line across, just so it takes away that harshness. Then wash that out and put it to one side. So now we're going to pop in where we want our wave. So we're going to take some phthalo green and add it to this mixture that we had before. And we're going to add a line about halfway into the painting. So take this green and bring it across. Now I know that waves are in fact lighter, they're usually white, but just underneath the wave it's usually darker in colour. Take a look at a picture of a wave if you're not sure what I mean. I'm just going to create that again with more phthalo green and a tiny bit of ultramarine blue, just to really make that stand out as dark green, like so. Now what we want to do is add a little bit of white into that mixture. And just above that dark green line, we want to put in this lighter line where we've added white. And then blend it back and forth. Like so. Now we're going to take this colour again. If you've run out, just make a bit more with some phthalo green and a bit of white. And just below the dark line, we're going to add that in again. So you should have, at this point, your cerulean sky, your horizon with phthalo green and ultramarine blue, then a light line with phthalo green and white, then your phthalo green, and then your phthalo green and white again. Now, the part below this, we're going to go even lighter. So we're going to have some phthalo green and quite a lot of white this time. And we can just paste that in. Again, feel free to blend it into what we've previously done. But if you don't like the blended look, then you can keep your brush strokes very strong. At this point, we can go ahead and take a tiny bit of white straight from the palette and blend that in here. Just to get it really light. We don't want it to be too white, but we just want it to be patches of lighter area, because that's what's going to make it lifelike. Right, now give your brush a really good wash out. Now we're going to put in the sand again. So take some yellow ochre and some white till it's fairly light in colour, and we can just pop that in again. I really love adding lots of layers to a painting because that's what builds up the colour and it makes it look more realistic, because every layer of paint, even though it may look opaque, it's very slightly transparent, and so it really builds up and makes it look a lot more 3D when you have more layers. So once again, we want to wait for that to dry. Okay, so when that's dry, you may want to move on to a slightly smaller brush. This isn't a huge brush, but it's just a tiny bit smaller to start adding more detail. Okay, so we're going to do like we have before, start coming down in the layers. So I'm going to take some cerulean blue and add some white. Now lower in the horizon line, although we can't see it, there is a tiny, tiny amount of red. So I'm going to take some cadmium red and just add ever such a little bit on my palette, because we're not going to use hardly anything at all. I'm going to take ever such a tiny amount and add it to this colour. So you want it so you can tell that it's there, but anyone that saw it probably wouldn't guess that you've put red into it. So just add a tiny bit at a time. When you've got the colour that you kind of like, and you can keep trying different colours and see which one you like the best, I'm going to go to the lowest part of the horizon and paste that in. Now, even though you couldn't tell on the palette so much, you can really tell when you paste it on the difference in the colour. And this is going to make it look a lot more lifelike. So we don't want to do the whole sky in this, we just want to paint that little bit above the horizon. Okay, and then if you want to take a bit of cerulean blue with some white and then just blend that in. If you just want to blend that in with the usual cerulean blue and white. And once you've taken it up to about halfway, take some cerulean blue and start blending it, the neat cerulean blue straight out of the tube. If you're not sure how to blend it in, what I usually do is take a bit on my brush and go across. And then I usually take the brush diagonal, work my way along the line, like that, and then go back over straight again. You can do that a few times until you feel like you've got to the right point. If your brush feels like it's drying out a little bit, just give it a wash. So I'm just going to blend now this line that's here. It's a little bit too strong for my liking. But if you've got it to the point where you're happy with it, feel free to leave it. And don't worry if it's not looking exactly the same as mine just now. Just keep going until you're happy with it. Okay, so I'm really happy with that sky now, and I don't think I'm going to do a lot more to it. There's a little area here that's not blended in as much. Okay, so now I'm going to wash my brush out really well. And yeah, you guessed it, we're going to pop in that horizon line again, just to really add the depth. So take some of your ultramarine blue again, and your phthalo green, and a tiny bit of yellow ochre. And once again, going over your horizon line. And once you're happy that it's straight, again, feel free to use masking tape if you'd rather. Then just take that colour down a little bit. Okay, and then wash your brush out when you're happy with that. Okay, so now's the fun part where we get to start adding in the waves. So I'm going to take some phthalo green and add white to it. We want to get a similar colour to what we had down here. Okay, and when you've got that, what we're going to do is just very gently just add in a very faint line along the top of the lighter line that we put in earlier. So again, this is just going to be visualizing where our waves are going to go. Now we want to wash our brush out. And just go over the line at the bottom just to blend that in a little bit. Just so it's not so harsh. And then wash out your brush. So we're going to do the same thing. So we're going to take that colour once again and add it into the lighter part that we added earlier on. So just once again, take that line across. And then blend it out And this is just creating the steps of waves for us. Now we want to add even more white to that mixture to get it really light but not white yet. And we're going to add in the last one, which is at the shore. So this is going to be a lot bigger and a lot wider. And we're going to blend that in. If it's not blending ever so well, just give your brush a wash and dab it on a paper towel, and then just use the water just to blend it up a little bit. Now, with it being the forefront, we don't want to blend too much, because when you see a wave at the forefront, you can see all the little lines in it. And so if it's totally smooth and blended, it will take away some of the realistic look. So it doesn't matter if you've got, you know, sort of little wider bits and more bluer bits, because that's just going to make it more effective. And again, wash your brush out. Now at this point, I really need to change my water, which means that you probably do as well. So let's get our waters nice and clean, ready for the next stage. Okay, now we want to wait for that to dry. Now we're going to add in the shore a little bit again. So take some of your yellow ochre and add in some white. Now we want this to be quite light. So now what we're going to do is we're going to paste it in just along the shore. And again, you don't want to be too blended at this point, because if it's a bit scruffy, it's going to make it look more lifelike. You take your paint, not really a wet paintbrush, fairly dry, and you put it down sort of at a 90-degree angle and scuffle. The best way I can describe it is to scuffle it along the canvas. And as you can see, we're going to bring it up just a little bit into where the water stops. I think this is called a scumble. Now when you've done it halfway up to this wave, that's going to be about right. So wash your brush out once again. And now if you take some more yellow ochre and some white, we're going to do the same to the bottom bit. Okay, that's lovely. So give your brush a good wash out again. Okay, so now we're going to take a palette knife. It's not an extremely large one, but it's not tiny either. And you want, you know, it doesn't have to be a point, but it can be, you don't really want one that looks like this, because this is more for mixing paint. So you definitely want one of these with a flat edge when you turn it to 90 degrees. You can get these from most art shops, or you can also get them online. Now we're going to add some more depth into this horizon line. So we're going to make that colour that we've been making. So we want to use phthalo green and ultramarine. Now this may take a bit of practice mixing paint, but you just tend to scoop it from side to side and then mix. Scoop, scoop and mix. And what we're going to do now is add a tiny, tiny bit of white, because we only want it to be a fraction of a lighter shade than what we've got currently. Okay, so as you can see, it's hardly lighter at all. And what we're going to do, we're just going to tap a palette knife onto the paint, so we've not got a great deal of paint, but it's just enough. and very, very lightly we're just going to drag it across this canvas. We want the paint to pick up on the tiny raised bumps along the canvas. So very lightly. Just drag it across. You can move it backwards and forwards, or you can stay one direction if you feel more in control. To get more paint, just tap it onto the palette and drag it across. So this is just going to add some more dimension into the painting and make it look like there are different waves into the distance. So now wipe your palette knife onto a piece of kitchen roll or a piece of towel or a piece of tissue, and we will be using this again in a little while. Feel free at any point to replenish the paint if you've run out. I've run out of cerulean blue, so I'm just going to add a little bit more of that. So now what we're going to do, we're going to make a very similar colour to the colour that we made just above the horizon line. So if you remember, we need a bit of cerulean blue, a lot of white, and the tiniest bit of pink. Now this is going to be used for the shadow of the wave. If you want a realistic wave in any painting, it's a lot better to, instead of starting out straight with white, because that's what we think a wave is and that's what we perceive a wave colour to be, but actually it's made up of a lot of greys and blues before the white. So to make it more realistic, we want to first paste in the waves with this sort of, it's sort of a grey when you add in the little bit of red. So first of all, I'm going to add in bits of this wave here. So I'm going to start here and I'm just going to very lightly scumble my way across to where I think the wave should be. So I'd like to take the wave as far down as here, so I'm just going to dab my brush along here, and then I'd like it to go up a bit here. Okay, so we've got the basic shape of where we want the wave to go. Now, we don't want to do it right up to the top because it needs to come down a little bit. So I'm going to do it about here and going up. So we've got a really nice shape of it rolling down. So just kind of dabble your brush. We don't want to make it just a solid blended colour. Just dab it along that area until you feel like we've got a nice area of the lighter colour. And it's okay to still show through some of the wave, we don't have to fill it all in. If you dab it on, it's quite lifelike as well because you can see all these little marks that look like water droplets. Okay, so this is just starting really to build up the waves nicely now. So I'm going to take that same colour and I'm going to bring in along the shoreline. So with that same technique, just dotting it along. Now you can create your shoreline straight or you can bring it in certain areas. It's completely up to you. And once you've done that, just wash your brush out. Okay, so next what we're going to do is we're going to use a lot smaller brush. This is pretty small and we're going to use this for some details now. So give it a wash so it's got some water on it. And we're going to take this lighter colour here with the phthalo green and white. If it's dried out or you've got none left, just make a little bit more. And we're going to start putting in some of that sea foam that we can see, just that floats along the top of the shore when a wave comes in. So I'm just going to start adding little patterns. Now we don't have to follow any strict rules here. You can use a photograph for some reference ideas, but we just want to make little patterns with no sort of rules to them that just look like they're floating and bobbing along the surface. Just let your brush take where it wants to go. I'm not following any rules here. I'm not copying anything, I'm just using my imagination. And you can do it very lightly, so it doesn't matter if some parts don't pick up the paint and other parts do. Just make sure that the lines are very thin. Then once you've done that, just wash your brush out. Now we're going to work on this shoreline a little bit more. Take some yellow ochre and a bit of ultramarine, and we're going to try and make a fairly deep shade of brown. When you feel like you've got a bit of a deeper shade, we just want to add a very, very thin line, almost to the point where you can't see it, just around where we want the shore to be. This is just going to be a shadow from the water, and we will mostly paint on top of this. So don't worry too much if you don't like the look of it, because we're only going to let some parts shine through from that. And give your brush a wash. So now we're going to do a similar idea to what we did down here, but we're going to focus more on this middle section now. So we want to make this deeper colour again, so we need the phthalo green and ultramarine blue, and mix that together until it's quite dark. And we're just going to paste in little areas, and instead of making it just a straight line, we're going to bring some depth into it and make it more lifelike. So first of all, we can add it to where it already is, and then we can kind of bring that up in different areas. So basically what we're doing here is we're just trying to take out the line, making it a bit more blended together rather than just a straight line. And we particularly want to add it underneath where we've got the waves to be, because this is what's going to add so much contrast and make it pop. Okay, so when we've done that, we can now add a little bit of white to that. And we're going to do the same thing but bring it down from the top. So what I'm usually doing is I'm putting the paint on, then giving my brush a really good wash, and while it's still a little bit damp, I'm just going to use a bit of water. As I said before, we don't want to blend it out so it's a straight line, but just so the colours meld together a little bit better. Okay, so when you're done, you should have something like this. Now, while we're waiting for that area to dry, we're going to add a little bit more dimension to this lower part again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some phthalo green and mix it with some white. You may already have some on your palette. And I'm going to add in a tiny little bit of the yellow ochre. Again, so you can tell that it's in there, but you don't want it to be yellow. And this is just going to again give the illusion of sand being underneath this shallow area. So you can add a bit of water to this part just to make it easier to spread onto the canvas. And in some areas we're just going to paste that in. Again, like before, you don't want it to be a straight line. You can sort of add it in very carefully, very lightly as well. And this is just going to give the illusion that we can see through the water, and you can see the colours of the sand underneath and the colour of the water mixing through to create this more yellow green. And you don't want to go as high as we did with the sea foam. Just keep it more to the shore. Okay, and when we've done that, just wash your brush out. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take our palette knife once again, and we're going to make this colour of the horizon for the last time. I promise this time. So take your phthalo green and your ultramarine, and with your palette knife this time you want to scoop it with one side so that most of the paint is on one side of the palette knife. And we're just going to add that in quite impasto, quite thick, just to the very top of the horizon line. So we might want to do this quite slowly to make sure that we still keep our straight line. Just do it bit by bit. This is where we start to make our painting look a bit more 3D. And this is why I love palette knives. Because this should make it look really interesting up close and from the side when the light catches it. Okay, and once you've done that, just wipe your palette knife once again. You want to wipe your palette knife quite well this time, because next we're going to be using it with white and we don't want this colour to get mixed in with it. The next thing what we're going to do is we're going to take this line and we're going to make it less straight and a little bit more lifelike and bumpy. So we want to make this colour again, which is just phthalo green and white. And this part you can add a bit more water again. You don't want too much water so that the colour doesn't stick and that it's quite see-through, but you want enough so that it moves easily onto the canvas. And this is going to be, you know, we don't need to plan this out too much, just take the line and just add some little lumps and bumps here and there, just to stop it looking so straight and a bit more wave-like, like the water is flowing. So I'm just going to add in some little points in places. And in some areas you can bring it up higher. Like here, for instance, I might bring it up just a little bit higher. Like that, and then again give your brush a wash. Now for another fun part, we're going to take some white directly off of the palette and we're going to start adding in a little bit more interest. So over the top of what we've already done here, we're just going to add, we don't want as many this time, but we're just going to add some very light sea foam areas, just like we did before. Again, I've not got a particular pattern for this. You just want to create some wavy lines, bits where the bubbles and the sea foams gathered on the top. And again, you don't want to press too hard for this part, you just want to lightly drag the paintbrush along the canvas so that it picks up some paint but not all of it. Okay, and what I'm going to do to finish that off is just to very lightly make some tiny little dots, just to show like where the sunlight is catching. The smaller here the better, because it's just going to really bring it to life a little bit more. You can even do some dots on top of some of the little lines you've made, but we don't want to do this too much. We don't want to take it too far, just tiny little ones where the light's caught it. Okay, now we're going to bring that idea up to some of the other areas of the sea. So particularly on the top of where we made some little points along this line here, we can just add tiny bits of white, just like where the sunlight will be catching it. As I said, the less the better, really. And I think I'm going to leave it at that. I might take that along a little bit. And again here, the smaller the better. Okay, so now I'm going to wash my brush. And we want to do the same thing along the next wave. So just along the top, we can add in some tiny little flecks of white. Like that. And we can even take a few to put in the darker shade of the horizon. Now this bit we want to be really careful that we don't want to overdo it. So usually I will just go for 2 or 3. So I might pop a little one in here, and this we want to be really careful with the brush to make sure it's ever such a small amount. something like that. And then I might go for one up here. And then wash your brush out. Okay, so we're nearly finished now, guys. Well done for getting this far. And we're going to do the most fun bit now. So make sure your palette knife is nice and dry and there's no colours on it. If there is, you can give it a little wash and wipe it down with a towel or a piece of tissue. So next what we're going to do is add some more waves, and we're going to be adding white. So it's really important that you want to make sure that everything is completely dry. So if that means you have to leave it for an hour, please just be that little bit more patient and just wait for it to dry, because otherwise we could have smudged what we've just done and that would be a nightmare. So let's go ahead and give that a few minutes just to dry. So what we want to do is we want to take some white straight off the palette again and just dot it just like we did before, just to get the excess white off. And what we're going to do, we're going to use the same rolling motion like that really brings the wave to life. Very, very lightly. Once again, we're going to drag it down. Now, when we do this, it's a lot better to be as light as possible and to build it up slowly than it is to go straight in with loads of paint, because you can't, well, it's difficult to take the paint away. So just keep tapping it and go as slowly as you like, and just using that motion, that rolling motion, just go over the light blue parts that we've put in. Now, the reason why we go so lightly, as I explained before, is going to pick up the little raised bumps in the canvas. And the reason why we use a circular motion is because it really helps make it more lifelike, because that's the motion that the wave has. So just keep going along. Now it's important that we want to be able to see some of the blue underneath, but not a lot, but just enough to make it look like there's some shadow in there. Some bits you can leave more shadowed as well. Because this bit is underneath the wave, because that bit's curling around, I'm going to leave this little area still more blue than the other parts. So then I can just take my palette knife and then bring that up here. And we can even take it up a little bit so the wind is taking the wave. And we can just carry on. So again, this bit is a little bit underneath the wave, so I'm not going to add too much. And again, because this is reaching the top, I'm just going to let the wind take that wave a little bit and just drag it upwards, but very, very careful at this point, very, very slowly and very, very lightly. We barely even want to press on. So I quite like this where the wind has taken it, and I'm not going to do it very much, but I'm just going to do it ever so slightly here. Barely very much at all. So when you're happy with that, we can do a very similar thing to the shore wave. So again, take some of your white and dot it onto the palette just to get the excess paint off. And what we're going to do, we're going to do the same motion along here. So think about how a wave comes in and it kind of trips over itself a little bit. So it's still a circular motion, but it's not necessarily going one direction, just sort of coming up a little bit more. And again, go very slowly. And this is the point where we can overstep this line a little bit and go over it in places, because think about where the shadow is and where the wave is starting to recede. So I've left a little gap here where it's receding a little bit, so there's not going to be a lot of shadow on this wave because it's coming in. But where it's receding, it could be a little bit more shadow. So this area, I'm going to take it over that line that we've pasted in. than this area, I'm going to leave it a little bit more above the line. And here, I'm going to go over it again. So we want it to kind of show through but barely noticeable so that it doesn't stick out too much in the painting. So take a step back, see if it needs some improvements. I can see a bit of a line here on mine, so I'm just going to blend that up a little bit so that's a little bit less noticeable. And I'm just going to add a little bit more waves here. So when you've done that, just wipe off your palette knife again. Take a look at it and see if there's anything that's bothering you about the painting, because it's better to change things now while we've still got all the equipment out there and to regret things a little bit later. And that's okay to start again. It's okay to paste over areas that you don't like with the colour underneath and wait for that to dry and then add it on top again if there's areas that you're not sure about. So this is the final painting. I really hope you enjoyed that, and thank you for painting with me.